Hello everybody, and we are back on Dr. Kashey's Processed Food Educational Series, the Immortal French Fry Part 2, Toxic Foods. Jeez, processed foods are toxic and unnatural. Good grief. Right? Now, black and white-minded food alarmist peoples and other foodies, they love to draw a hard-ass line between natural and artificial foods. But I still don't really know what the heck that means, even after all that screaming and yelling in the last video we did, because it's already been established that processed foods are full of chemicals and unfresh and addictive. Now they're fake and artificial too. That's actually really impressive. A dangerous world we live in, folks. This leaves regular people very frustrated and at a loss, I think. And pulling from the previous sections, it's obvious that regular people can differentiate between shiny Pop-Tart foils and a mushroom that still has dirt on it, but what about all the stuff in between? I think that's what causes a lot of the fuss. Again, we can agree that like shelled nuts, vegetables with dirt and bird poop on them, eggs right out of a cage-free chicken, and berries right off the bush are natural, right? Sure. But what happens when these foods have been cleaned, sanitized, chopped, milled, cracked open, sliced up? Are they natural then? Or are they artificial yet? Let's up the ante. What if those foods were then baked, steamed, roasted, put in the fridge, cooked with oil, or blended? Does that make foods unnatural? Okay. What if after you cook those foods, you stuck them in jars, like beans or vegetables? Or is a metal jar, a can, artificial? Or is a glass jar natural? I guess how much naturally occurring glass is out there? Not much, I don't think. What if they dried the foods out, like raisins or jerky, and mixed them together until they had an even texture, like tomato sauce? Or stuck them in the freezer, like fruit picked at the peak of its ripeness and frozen in time? Or fermented them, like you do with beer, yogurt, kombucha, or cheese? Does adding bacteria, a living thing, to a food turn it artificial food-like thing? I don't know. Okay, I've got it. What if before you cooked the ingredients, you combined them with flavor enhancers, like salt, herbs, and spices, huh? What if a food that isn't normally red is now turned red and that dye came from concentrating down carrots, tomatoes, or raspberries? What if I, as a biochemist, did an extraction on those foods and figured out exactly the biochemical that makes those foods red? And then once I figured it out, I made that exact plant-based red color in a tube without the plant, so we can use fewer foods as decoration and more foods to eat. That's synthetic, yes, but does that make the food artificial now? Is the caffeine that comes out of a beaker different from the caffeine that comes out of coffee? What if I extracted the caffeine from coffee, made caffeine in a beaker, and then put the caffeine back? Is this now fake, unhealthy, artificial coffee? Or wait, is the difference made when foods are prepared in a tiny frying pan in a person's home or a gigantor frying pan in a food manufacturing facility? When and where does food go from food to food-like substance in the food evolution process? Nobody really knows, I don't think. They only agree that there's a line, and once it's crossed, they're no longer food, but artificial and natural and healthy, etc. And since dichotomous populations only speak in extremes, it seems, they can conveniently ignore 95% of the food supply when writing propaganda and structuring arguments. You know, the stuff that people eat. The 95% of the food that people eat, right? Garden salads and mixes, primary processing, milk powder, secondary processing, freshly baked bread, formulated. All these foods are processed, but which food is artificial? Which food is fake? Diving into other formulated foods, granola bars, chili in a can, pre-made frozen meals, ice cream, Twinkies. I bet Twinkies pushed a hot button for some of you. The hot button was pressed. Now all these foods are heavily processed. But what makes one food more realer than the other? Is it the color, the texture, the number of ingredients, where it's made, some other thing? What makes a food artificial? What makes a food natural? What makes a food a robot or cybernetic? Or bioengineered versus chemical engineered? Want to know what the practical differences are between these foods? The amount of sugar, fat, and salt. In other words, some foods are junkier than others. And that loops us back to the beginning, folks. Words matter. Words matter. Natural, artificial, fresh, processed, whatever. It's all stupid and useless. Junk food is the useful term here, everybody. Junk food. Drawing a line between junk food and not junk food is far easier for everyone. Not just a normal person, everyone. And it leads down a more reasonable, healthier path than any of that other crap. And this brings us back to public perception. and how important that is versus spitting facts and pointing at graphs and charts. I'm good at that. Try and avoid it even though I'm good at it. And that will never work to defend the population against social and highly emotional fearmongers. So when communicating this concept to people, I suggest I make a continuum of their own, okay? I try and describe it like the hilariously misleading art that shows the primate evolving into an upright man and then shrinks back down into a computer again. Since beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it's best to have a person create their own true north by generating their own food list, their own continuum of foods that go from totally not junky to so totally most definitely junky. And this is why junk food is important to differentiate from processed food. By going through this exercise, you help yourself and other people draw that line where you or they see it. Heck, you may not have to draw a line at all, and that's 100% fine. The moral of this story is that I guarantee a regular person will draw their line, if they draw one at all, once they get to their version of junk food. And this is way better than having night sweats about natural versus artificial versus addictive versus fresh versus GMO versus healthy versus whatever the heck. Energy density plots, which I go into heavily in other material, they closely parallel people's junk food continuums as well. Just like using the term junk food, a term people already recognize and understand, well enough anyway, working with people's perceptions help them improve their lifestyle, and they will fare way better than generating friction and resistance by trying to convince people of things. Just ask about what they already know and agree. It's not going to be wrong. Not in this instance, okay? It's their own preferences. Everyone needs an anchor to make their decisions, and drawing your own line in the sand by using facts and common sense is superior to being ping-ponged back and forth by vegan cat moms and clickbait-driven alarmist articles. Shoot, if any processed garbage does exist, it's that. Misinforming people by twisting research and fear-mongering is the real processed garbage that's bad for your health. And this segues perfectly into our next topic, which has concerns about food processing and depleted ingredients. Now, if you go through this seriously, then you and everyone else can ignore all that crap floating around and get your attention back.